Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our comics marathon of Monsters of the Mind. Today, we're discussing how do different comic companies have portrayed an Atlantis-themed superhero. So, yeah, let's dig into this. But before we get in, what is Atlantis? Well, Atlantis was described by famous philosopher Plato as a city that was very advanced, but they ended up getting too large of an ego, which led to the gods flooding their city, sinking it to the bottom of the sea. Now, the thing about Atlantis is that it was never meant to be seen as a real place. It was always meant to be allegorical in a way. It was meant to be like a metaphor for what happens when power goes unchecked, or something like that. I forget what the exact metaphor is. But unfortunately, later on, archaeologists and historians missed the point of this context and thought that Plato was describing either a real place or a place that people thought was real. And as such, Atlantis became like a location cryptid, with people insinuating that Atlantis is somewhere and it's a real place and we can find it. As such, Atlantis has become a popular place in TV shows and movies, and of course, comic books, portraying it as basically an underwater city that manages to thrive even after falling beneath the waves. And right here, we're going to be comparing and contrasting how Marvel and DC portrayed Atlanteans by looking at their main representatives. From Marvel, we have Namor the Submariner, and from DC, we have Arthur Curry, better known as Aquaman. Now, before we begin, I should clarify if this even counts. Well, here's the thing. In both these comics, Atlanteans are more or less a distinct branch from humans. In fact, in Marvel, they are literally a different species of a different scientific name, Homo moranis, instead of Homo sapien. So I think it's safe to say they are distinct enough to count as a different species, since, well, even they're considered a different species than human. But before we get into differences, let's look at their commonalities. First off, both these guys are hybrids. One is a human parent, and one has an Atlantean parent. Both are Atlantean royalty. Both of them have pretty similar powers. They can both, of course, breathe underwater and can move through waters at incredible speed. Both also wield a trident and have telepathic control over aquatic life. But, despite their similarities, these two have had different characterizations and trajectories over the years. So let's do a little comparison. Namor is an anti-hero, and he is known for being pretty temperamental. Smallest thing can make him mad, and he has a pretty low view on surface life. Meanwhile, Aquaman's a lot more traditionally heroic, and is a lot even-tempered, and he doesn't want to wage war on land. So, yeah, not as bad as the other guy. Both characters have similar powers, but there are some ones that are unique to each other. For one, Namor can fly, thanks to having wings on his feet. This is not a trait of Atlanteans normally in Marvel, but rather it's the result of Namor being a mutant. And plus, in his early appearance, Namor had the power to use the powers of sea creatures, including being able to inflate like a pufferfish. I'm not talking about this, let's move on. Aquaman's a lot better suited for being on land. Now, at first, both characters couldn't be on land for too long or they'd become a lot weaker, but this was later removed for Aquaman, allowing him to be as amphibious as he wants. Aquaman's also sometimes given hydrokinesis, which Namor used to have, but he lost it. Alright, well, let's look into both characters' origins in the comics. Namor appeared first in 1939's Marvel Comics #1, making him one of the oldest characters Marvel still uses, predating the Hulk, Spider-Man, Captain America, all of them. This comic sets up Namor's characterization pretty well. He hates surface dwellers and doesn't care if you're a good guy or bad guy. You mess with the ocean, you're dead. This is exemplified by how Namor basically says he equally hates both parties involved in World War II. Anyways, Namor's been primarily involved with the groups of the Defenders, which mostly consist of heroes who usually fly solo, and the Illuminati, a group dedicated to basically being a secret society of superheroes. I'm not entirely sure how to describe them, actually. That's the best analogy I can think of. Aquaman came out 2 years later in More Fun Comics #73. Originally, Aquaman was an experiment who was tested on by his father as a baby to make him breathe underwater, before he was changed to make him a hybrid, because I guess that was just too depressing of a superhero origin. Well, I mean, superhero origins are usually supposed to be depressing. I mean, Batman's parents were literally killed in cold blood, but I don't know. I don't know why they changed it, okay? Anyway, in this story, Aquaman fights a submarine. Nice. Later on, Aquaman would become a primary member of the Justice League, being part of it in almost every incarnation. So, I bet you're wondering, why did Aquaman become more famous than Namor if he came out first? Well, not really simple to get an exact answer. I mean, I can't really explain why anything is more popular than the other thing. But the best one I can think of is that Aquaman just had better marketing. You see, Namor's first comics weren't very popular, they just did okay. So, when Marvel made Captain America just a few years later, who proved to be very popular, they probably didn't see a reason why they should continue to promote Namor, since now they had an actual moneymaker. Meanwhile, Aquaman's always been a pretty upfront character marketing wise. He appeared more often in other media, and for a while, his comics were actually pretty hot sellers, being right up there as some of DC's best sellers, believe it or not. Yeah, believe it or not, Aquaman's negative reputation, which we'll get to later, that's actually a relatively new thing. For a while, his comics were pretty decent sellers. And plus, Aquaman's included in a lot more non comic media, while Namor is pretty much never adapted. I also think the reason people are more familiar with Aquaman is that I think people just like him more. Namor can be a difficult character to like. A lot of anti-heroes are, given his attitude, really. While Aquaman's a lot more accessible to everyone, especially if you're not a big fan of anti-heroes or protagonists who aren't traditionally likable. Those are just my two theories as to why Aquaman became more popular, though it could really be for anything. Alright, now let's look at these two's appearances outside the comics. Well, with Namor, he's basically never been a major player in anything. Most of his TV appearances are one-offs. In most video games, he's either a cameo or they're mobile games, so who cares? But he did make his MCU debut in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. He was a pretty big player, being an antagonist like his comic counterpart. As for Aquaman, he's been in a lot more stuff. Of course, the DCEU had 2 movies, as well as being a major character in Justice League. Aquaman's basically been in every animated version of the team, and he once almost got his own live-action show, but it didn't get picked up. He's also been in plenty of video games, including Aquaman Battle for Atlantis, which is often considered one of the worst games ever made. So, yeah, not really a win there. But then we have what's probably Aquaman's most notorious adaptation, which ended up becoming an incarnation that would haunt him for years. The Super Friends, a group of cartoons focused on DC heroes. Now, these cartoons came out during a pretty bad time to be an action show, as during the 60s and especially the 70s, parent groups watched cartoons like a hawk for anything bad that could happen in them, and if something even remotely violent happened, they would flip out. Because of this, the characters in this show had to be massively nerfed from their comic counterparts, meaning no realistic violence like punching and kicking, or anything that could be imitatable. All the heroes were hit pretty hard by this. Characters who specialized in melee combat were just reduced to picking people up, and in general, everyone was a lot more pathetic than their comic versions. Aquaman especially was hit hard by this. You see, Aquaman had his super strength taken away and was made the guy who can swim fast and talk to fish. Yep, that's literally all he could do in the show, making him entirely useless out of water. And yet, despite his very situational powers, he was brought along in almost every episode, making it so the writers had to make some sort of excuse for him to be there, like there inexplicably being large bodies of water in the middle of the desert, or things like that. So, he had an incredibly nerfed character, simplified to a version of his powers that are incredibly lame sounding, and he's shoved down your throat. This ended up causing Aquaman's public reputation to take a massive nosedive, and for decades he ended up being known as the guy who can talk to fish and can't do anything on land, no matter how much the comics showed off how strong he can be. After all, if you live at the bottom of the ocean, do you know how much strength that would require? So, you'd be pretty strong and hard to hurt, wouldn't you? After all, even most machines can't go that deep. And you could explain that he doesn't talk to fish, he pretty much hijacks their brain and forces them to do his bidding, and his powers also have a minor effect on all living things, since after all, life began in the sea. But, despite how much you told people this, all anyone would ever see him as is the guy with flame powers. Whenever a piece of media did a superhero parody, then whoever the Aquaman stand-in would be useless, or his powers would be given to the member of the group who's considered the lame one. Aquaman's the butt of jokes in many comedy shows. And yeah, thanks to Super Friends, Aquaman's image has been tainted pretty hard. Luckily though, as more people are becoming aware of what comics Aquaman is like, this reputation's getting better, especially after the movie came out. In fact, nowadays, people who still make Aquaman as useless jokes are more likely to be called out for not doing their research or just making fun of him because other people made fun of him. And I'm glad, because it's silly to judge an entire character by a bad incarnation. Hey, I have an idea. How about we all start acting like Godzilla's a wimp just because of the '98 film? Would you consider that fair? No, it wouldn't. And it's no different here. Aquaman and Namor, the two deep diving guys of comic books. Well, we still got time. How about we look at how other media's portrayed Atlantis denizens? In the Disney movie Atlantis, Atlanteans are a lost race of humans shown to have created the language that all modern languages originated from. Not entirely sure how that works, but whatever. And they're shown to be pretty technologically advanced. In SpongeBob, Atlantis is inhabited by strange alien creatures who came to Earth to protect a bubble. I'm not joking, by the way. And of course, there's Perytons, which I made a whole video about. But in a nutshell, allegedly, Roman texts described a deer-like creature that rose from the dead bodies of Atlantis, but Perytons are controversial since the oldest record of them was a book that didn't give any source to where they got the information of them from, so take them with a grain of salt. More than other mythical creatures. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, most media just portrays Atlantis as being populated by mermaids. The end. Next time, we're talking about what happens when you get a suit with a mind of its own. See you next time.